Welcome, one and all. Let me call this public hearing to order, 5:15 here on November 17th. Thank you all for coming. This is the public hearing. We've had the press and public notified. This has to do with ordinance 2015, and we'll deal with 2015-14 and 2015-15 at the same time. It's an ordinance amending our code, zoning certain properties within the PDD, Plan Development Zone District, to a new SR3 zoning district and a new P3 Preservation Overlay District. The properties being rezoned are 51 properties between Palm Boulevard and the Atlantic and east side of 53rd Avenue and 56th Avenue, including the pedestrian beach accesses, etc. So I'm going to first, in opening this up, ask Douglas to step forward from our building department and zoning administration to tell us how we got here and what this all pretends to be.
Okay, Mayor, thank you very much. Give a short bit of background and a little bit of how we've kind of developed the strategy of what's gotten us here today, and then we'll go into a little bit of the detail of these codes. These codes are coming from learning that the restrictive covenants that were in place controlling the development between 53rd Avenue and 56th Avenue expired in 2007. So those covenants basically referred any type of control to the Wild Dunes Community Association in terms of developing or setting limits on the size, setbacks, height of buildings in that area. The Wild Dunes Community Association has been handling the architectural review control for that area ever since it's been developed, and they had been doing so until very recently when they learned that those covenants had expired. They notified the city that they no longer had any control. We looked at our documentation, and we also determined that we basically had no control. So we were left in this situation where we think technically kind of anything would go in those blocks. If somebody wanted to amass land and build an apartment complex or anything else that you can really think of, they probably would have been allowed to do that. So the staff and the city attorney and the Wild Dunes Community Association and their attorneys looked at different options of how to approach this problem, and we looked initially at trying to breathe new life into these expired covenants. We were told that according to the state law, that was not an option, that couldn't be done legally once they had expired. They could not be brought back to life. We looked at the feasibility of creating new covenants that exactly mirrored the old covenants. So we wanted to keep the status quo in that area, and we thought that might be a reasonable way to do that. There were some hurdles with doing that, though, in that really developing the covenants and encumbering those properties would have been or is really the business of the property owners themselves to do. That's not really a thing that the city can do. So there's that hurdle with that option. And additionally, we believe that all of those property owners and their banks would have to agree to these new covenants, and that clearly would pose some challenges. So the other option we looked at was extending the existing SR1 zoning district. That's the residential district that is immediately across 53rd Avenue. And initially, when you look at the two areas, they seem to be similar enough that maybe we could just extend that zoning district. But when you get into the nuances of how that area has developed, it appears that really there would be the area would not really mesh well with the SR1 standards. So that led us to the conclusion that probably the best thing to do was to develop a new zoning district, the SR3 zoning district, and with the intent of making the standards for the SR3 district closely mirror the Wild Dunes Community Association standards. So that's what we've done. And just quickly on some things that will not change for those properties, things that are in the SR3 zoning proposal and are also included in the Wild Dunes Community Association standards. Quick list of those things. The lot coverage would be 35%. That's the standard now, and that's what's being proposed. Setbacks are 20 feet in the front, 30 feet in the rear, 15 feet on the side. Those are currently Wild Dune standards. They're proposed to be the same for SR3. An accessory structure setback being the same as the house. That's different from the other Isle of Palm zoning regulations where accessory structures are allowed to go as close as 6 feet. In this district, they would be limited to being within the setbacks of the house. Allowing accessory structures to have living space in them. That's also different from SR1 or SR2, but that's currently in the standards for the Wild Dunes ARC. We're proposing that that stay the same. Maintaining view corridors for oceanfront properties. That's not done anywhere else on the island, but it's included in this document for SR3. And having a minimum house size of 1,600 square feet versus 1,000 square feet, which is the standard in the rest of the island. There are a number of things that that will be different under this proposal, just by the nature of the city not really being able to not being able to do some of the same things. First of all, probably the biggest difference for those properties is there would be no architectural review for these properties. They have always had they've always had a review process for the appearance of the house, and the city does not do that. If you fit within the standards, we would permit the construction. Something else that's new is they have never had a floor to area ratio requirement, and I think that this will address the mass of the buildings, which I think is a lot of what the Architectural Review Committee was doing. So I think it'll have some benefit in terms of keeping the houses a size that's in proportion with the lot size. Another difference is the addition of the Preservation Overlay District. Currently, there is no zoning control over the oceanfront properties. There are deed limitations, and there used to be covenants that controlled that area, but there was no real zoning control over the oceanfront space in front of these houses, between the houses and the Atlantic Ocean. So this P3 Preservation Overlay District will be new for that area. The way the front setbacks are measured will be slightly different. We've always measured from the road because of the way those lots have developed. That will be a change. Sometimes they've been measured from driveways or other things. And that's really a summary of kind of the similarities and the differences of what's being proposed here.
Well, one other difference is the height limitation. I think Wild Dunes had a standard, but they deviated it frequently from the 40-foot.
The standard is 40 feet for the Community Association and SR3. The point has been made that the Community Association may have deviated from those standards more frequently than probably the city would have and will in the future. Okay, we're going to take public comment. While it's on the agenda for second reading, we're going to defer, to be my recommendation, to defer any action on these ordinances till at least January, because the Planning Commission, first of all, we're trying to solicit input tonight and any time in the future, but the Planning Commission's already had one meeting on this, and I suspect they're going to have at least one more. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. The Planning Commission is midstream of reviewing these standards. They reviewed them at their last meeting. They're expecting to continue to review them and refine them and come back with a final recommendation in the near future. So they would hope that you would defer the second reading.
Yes, that would be the intent. Okay, thank you. Now we'll open it up for anybody who would like to address council on these ordinances. Please. We ask that you state your name, address, try and limit yourself to 3 or 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is John Cahill, and my wife and I own number 8 54th Avenue. I'm here actually with my in-laws, the Kirklands, who live on 53rd Avenue adjacent to us, and have spoken extensively with the Holshers, who are our next-door neighbors on 53rd Avenue, and Ms. Rothschild, who is further up the beach. And appreciate your willing to allow me to speak for a few minutes. This is a very important topic to us. There are really two topics here. The first topic is the zoning for the neighborhood, and the second topic, which is quite distinct, is the property held in trust, or was meant to be held in trust, oceanside from our beachfront properties. The Holshers and the Rothschilds and I are beachfront. And let me say, at the outset, let me say I appreciate very much the Mayor's and Linda's and Douglas's openness to us and willingness to share information with us and a previous meeting on the subject. The background here is important. The Kirklands have had their houses in Wild Dunes for close to 40 years. The Holshers have been here for a long time. I mooched off my in-laws for quite a long time, and we bought our house a little over 2 years ago on the beachfront. And at that time, I spent a lot of time looking at the restrictive covenants. I talked to city officers, Wild Dunes Association individuals, as well as met with OCRM up in North Charleston about the guidelines and also about what could be done or not done with that oceanfront property, because it was very important when you're buying oceanfront property. The value is inherently in that property. And where we are now is, as Douglas said, the Wild Dunes says they no longer have the right to enforce these covenants, even though the covenants say in them that they fundamentally are important to the property values of this neighborhood for any purchases of the lots or any future purchases of the lots in that neighborhood. And while I appreciate the complexity and the desire for an amicable solution, as Douglas said, it's really not practical for 51 homeowners and their banks, to the extent people have mortgages, to try to come to a conclusion on restrictive covenants. This is fundamentally very important to us. So let me then talk about just the two sections. First, the SR3 zoning itself. As Douglas indicated, the intention, I think, and I very much appreciate this, is to respect the unique configuration of these streets and the restrictive covenants as they were in the past. I have sent over to Douglas, and I think by extension to the Planning Committee, our suggestions for changes to those. I think the one, and I'm happy to talk through those now, they're really not that momentous, but they're pretty important to us. I think the one, now that Douglas mentioned it, perhaps the one that's perhaps most important to us is the setbacks and the lot coverage. Our desire would have them be identical to the Isle of Palms, not the 35%, but to 40%, et cetera. The reason being that through the years, Wild Dunes has had many, many variances to the provisions, and therefore it would be an undue burden to those of us who may build new houses, as perhaps I would like to do, to be limited to where Wild Dunes has offered to homeowners in the past. For example, my next-door neighbor's house is 48 feet tall. And that was a rare exception, not a rare exception. There are many exceptions there. The other provisions we suggest are, as Douglas said, preventing, putting more effective language in perhaps for the second row landowners so that their sight lines are preserved, while allowing front beach owners to have a modest fence on their property lines that is non-obtrusive in terms of those sight lines. We'd also like to add back no rent or for sale signs, which is a nice element of our neighborhood today, and to have the walkover language similar or identical to that of the rest of the island. For some reason, the provisions have it slightly different. So these are meant to be just clarifications. Essentially, the intent is, and I think the city has done a very good job of helping us try to figure out this very complex situation, but we would very much appreciate your consideration for these changes as we've outlined in writing. So the second topic is the preservation zone. In sum, we are very much against any provision that has a beach renourishment element in that SR3, the preservation zone. Again, the history is important. The restrictive covenant language is very clear in that the language beachside or ocean side of the beachfront homes was intended to be held in trust for the benefit of these 51 homeowners. And it's private property. It is not public property. and that is to go to the high water mark. And at the time of the deep scraping of the beach last year, Carolyn Holster and I had many conversations and emails between us and Linda and Steve and Trainum of the engineering firm, who provided us assurances at that time that our land would be protected and that the sand would come back that was transported away from us. And you know, at that time, this question of the trust came into question because we were not happy with the fact that machinery was on that property. And we did engage a lawyer, one who's highly experienced in coastal real estate rights, whose conclusions we shared with the city, and certainly had a very different viewpoint from the city in terms of the status of that property and the use of that property. But based on the assurances we were provided by the city and frankly, the dire situation of the beachfront owners further up the beach, and frankly, the cost also of litigation, we decided not to do the right thing and not contest at that stage, and to let the beach renourishment effort go on. However, we remain resolute that Wild Dunes and the city have no right to seize this private property and to use it for any other purposes other than what it was intended, and that is for the benefit of these 51 beach owners. Of course, being what it is, the sand was never returned. The beach is still damaged significantly. Now, I'm not here to opine on whether it's at all sensible to scrape beaches and to move sand around. Certainly, the situation is even more dire further up the beach today than it was before. The good news is there's an enormous shoal that's there for use and for renourishment if that is what the sound wants to do, what the city wants to do. But the city's also told us that they have absolutely no intention of coming on this property, the property I'm referring to scrape any further. And so therefore, there is no need for this provision in this overlay, this zoning overlay. And we remain very, very much against any acknowledgement that this is not private property that is for use, again, for these homeowners. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to address on these two ordinances? Please, come forward.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. My name is Jay Claypool, 151 Meeting Street, Charleston, South Carolina, 29401. I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of the owner of the Wild Dunes Resort, owner and operator. It's Low Wild Dunes Investors. It's quite distinct from the Wild Dunes Community Association. The reason why I'm here is that, as Douglas alluded to, the property that's in question, the 51 lots, was formerly zoned PDD. That is the zoning designation for all of the Wild Dunes Resort. If you know anything about the PDD, it has a limited number of development rights, development limitations, and it has a set property boundary, so it's fixed. So in this scenario where 51 lots and houses are being rezoned from PDD to SR3, P3, however the city determines, what is effectively happening is the PDD zoning, because it's fixed, is now changing. It's diminishing in terms of development rights. The boundary is shrinking. It's changing. And so Wild Dunes, the resort, supports all the efforts on behalf of the city, provided that in these changes to the PDD, that the status quo is preserved, that whatever remaining development rights subject to the existing development limitations, that freeze in time, essentially, that status quo is preserved. The way that we intend to sort of proceed is what's pending right now, the two ordinances. They only deal with the 51 lots. They have not gotten into the concepts of, well, how is the PDD changing, and what do we need to do via ordinance to memorialize the fact that they've changed and what rights and limitations remain. So we are working with city staff, Douglas and Sterling, to come up with some language to add to the ordinance that's being commented on tonight, that's pending, We're also working with staff to come up with a tag-along, an additional ordinance that talks about how the PDD has been amended and what the effect of this rezoning has on the remaining PDD zoning. And we're working with staff to present that to council so that you can take it up. The only other thing I would add is that because this ordinance that's pending tonight is going to be deferred for consideration in the future, perhaps January, that we can use the intervening time to try to introduce the new ordinance so that all these ordinances on this issue could be considered by the public and council simultaneously, so that at the point when they're ready to be adopted, they could all be adopted in conjunction with one another. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's the initial intent. We wanted to get the pending ordinance doctrine in place, which meant we had to create an ordinance, have first reading, post it, have a meeting like this, so the ordinance protecting those properties is in place now. But we fully intended to deal with the PDD and changes that affect there. So.
And point taken. And we've had a great success so far working with staff, and I think we're all on the same mental page. It's just now in the fun stage of trying to reduce that auto writing so that it's comprehensible. But yes, sir.
Well, we have lawyers.
Thank God.
Yeah, it keeps you busy. Okay, other comments? Please.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Gould. I'm the owner, along with my husband, of number 2 53rd Avenue. I just want to, first of all, Ed said I'm being too nice in saying all this, just to thank all of the Isle of Palms professional staff. I mean, I think what you all come up with is outstanding, and we're very appreciative, because what we have is a debacle, and we've had this debacle since 2007. And had I known that my oceanfront property was not going to always be oceanfront, needless to say, I would not have purchased an oceanfront property on this part of Isle of Palms. Ed and I came here we bought the house in 1996, and at the time we had a kid in high school and one in college. And the reason we decided on this particular property, because we had owned a lot on 4th Street. And when I saw those mini hotels going up, I thought, this is not it. And we've owned properties on Seabrook and in Cahill, but we specifically chose Isle of Palms because of family and the family ambiance here. And what has come to fruition for us now, all around us, 53rd, 54th, 52nd, are people who have families and want to use this property generationally, which is our goal. So our kids were in kindergarten and college, and now we have 5 grandchildren, 9 and under, all of whom really enjoy coming here. And so, am I happy about this? I think the island is trying to do the best for us. But what would make me personally very much more comfortable is in the protected, but not quite 3 acres that is for our benefit, which evidently expired in 2007. I can see that the oceanfront owners should have title to that property, or at the very minimum, it should be put in some sort of perpetual trust for the use of the families that have the oceanfront properties. And with the use of all the 51 other residents who are using those boardwalks to get up to the street. So that's about all I have to say. I think most of the ordinances are fine. The one thing, and John spoke of it, no more beach scraping for us. If you just go out to the beach today, it's a nightmare out there. You can't even walk up 53rd today, and if it's semi-dark, you're going to fall in a ditch that's more than 2 feet deep. And I did that. I didn't fall in, but yesterday I did that walk. So our beach is dramatically different since the sand scraping. And when the sand scraping occurred, I actually came to the stakeholders meeting, and I was totally in favor of it, because categorically, it was stated that that sand would only be taken from the wet part of the beach. Well, lo and behold, my husband told me today we've lost like 60 feet of beach and a lot of dune. So we just, that's not even a negotiable point for us. So, you know, let the P1, the P2 have it, but the P3, that's not going to work for us. And I guess that's all I have to say. But thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Very good. Anyone else wish to speak?
I just wanted to share with council all of the communications that we've received via email from these affected residents will be provided to all of council as well. So you'll have those comments.
All right, very good. I'm going to close the public hearing, and thank you all for coming.